Hi everyone, today we're going to be working on our third Coding for Good badge, and today we're going to create an app that basically tracks the steps you take in a day and tells you whether you reach your step goal or not. So before we get started on coding it, let's take a look at the final product so we kind of know what we're working towards today. So we start off with this screen and it displays some instructions about setting our daily step goal. So once you click this start button, which I kept as Mario, click that and it asks you what your daily step goal is. So I'm just going to say, let's say 5,000. And then you press enter and it displays your step goal on the top. And then it has a bar to measure your progress and it tells you how many total steps you've taken that day. So every time I click this star, it's going to add a certain number of steps. And once I reach my step goal, it's going to display a winning message and change the background. So now just pause the tutorial here and move on to Google Classroom, where you should see a template that looks like this. So take a minute to do that. So once you have your template open, we can actually start coding our game. So the first thing we have on our screen is we have a kind of a mess, right? And we have this display, so we need to get rid of all this stuff. So when we click on Mario, we also want it to disappear, right? We need to set our instructions on the top. So let's start off with our instructions, which are going to be over here. So over here we can type in our text to display our instructions. So inside the quotation marks, we want to give some instructions like set your daily step goal. And then these are going to display on the top. So the default color is black. So if you want black, you can leave it blank, or you can type black. You can also change it to another color like red or purple, whichever one you want that kind of suits your screen, or whichever color is your favorite. But you want to make sure it's readable. So maybe like blue might be a bit hard to read. Yeah, so don't do anything like that. So we can do purple. I think purple would look good. So the next thing we want to do is we have our start game image, which is our Mario in the back. So we already have that created for you, but if you want to change your image, you can go into this gray section over here, click image, and let's say I want to change it to the unicorn. All I would do is see this part right before .png, I would change it with this part right before .png. So I could do unicorn, and you can see the unicorn in the background a little bit. I'm just going to keep mine Mario, and the name of this start game image, whatever you want it to be, it's always going to be start. The next thing we want to do is we want to create a variable for step goal. So we already have that part created. So var basically creates a variable, and the name of the variable is step goal. Like over here, we created an image for our start game, and our variable's name is start, and this is what we use to create the variable. So for the step goal, we don't really know what the user wants yet, right? So we're just going to set it to a random value. So I'm just going to set it to 1. And then the user is going to reset this later too. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to go through this function over here. So this function basically, a function is a set of instructions, and this set of instructions runs when the start button is clicked, or when the mouse is down on the start button. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to reset our step goal. So we're just going to say step goal is equal to. And now we want to ask the user for their step goal, right? We don't know it yet, so we can't actually type in a certain number. So to ask the user for a step goal, we want to say prompt. And this basically gives us a prompt box on the top of our screen. And we're going to type our question inside parentheses and then quotation marks. And I'm going to say, what is your daily step goal? That's what I'm going to do on my prompt. Okay, so when we click our start button, we also have a new backdrop come up. So let me just, so this is our new backdrop. As always, you can always change it by going into this gray sprites and backgrounds section, clicking background, and choosing an image from here. Like if you want like tomato attack backdrop, just copy that part and replace it with the name over here. So now we want, like, we click the start button and it changed the background, but we also want to hide the start button once we're done with that. So to do that, we're going to say start dot hide, and this just hides our button. So now let's test this out and see if it works. And it hid the button, which is good. So as coders, we always want to test out whatever we code every couple lines just to make sure we don't have any huge errors, right? Because if we write 100 lines of code and it errors out, it's going to be a problem and it's going to be hard to find the error. So now what we're going to do is we wanted to display the step goal on the top over here. So all we have to do is we have the part where it says step goal, but we just want to add in our number. So our number is stored in the step goal variable. So all you have to do is type in plus step goal. So let's say our step goal is 5,000, and then it will display 5,000 on the top. So now we're just going to scroll down a little bit to the section where it says bar steps walked. So we already created a steps walked variable. And I'll talk a little bit why it's called -5 or stored as -500 a bit later. And I guess some of you will be able to see why too as we play the game. So we also have a steps bar, which is this blue thing right over here, and it basically marks the progress. So every time we click the star and the steps increase, our progress bar increases too. But let's go to our start screen. We don't want our total steps and our total bar to show, right? So we're going to hide this stuff. So like we hid our start game image, we're going to say steps bar dot hide. And then we're going to do the same thing for the step counter text. So we're going to say step counter text dot hide. So once we're done with that, so now that we've hidden our step counter text and our steps bar, we can see that they've actually disappeared. And we also want to make sure that we click the button on the top right corner of our screen. If it's yellow, that means it's not saved yet, right? So we want to make sure that we save ours. Now we want to create a button to add the steps to, which is our star. You can kind of see it poking out behind all the game over messages. So we want to hide that at the beginning too, because we don't want people to add steps before they've even set their step goal. So we're just going to say add steps dot hide. So this hides the star, and you can see it already saved and it changed that. So now let's think about actually adding our steps. We already created the actual image for adding our steps, but we never told it to add steps. So what we're going to do is we're going to code a small function which adds steps whenever our star button is pressed, basically, or whenever the mouse is down on the star button. So we want to add 500 steps each time. So we're going to say steps walked is equal to steps walked plus 500. So this basically adds, so let's say we start off with 0 steps, right? This is going to add 500 to that. So then my new total steps is 500, which gets restored into steps walked. So now we want to actually display it under the bar, right? Which is our step counter text. So like we did before, we're just going to say plus steps walked. So now let's try running this, and 5,000 is my goal, and it just shows up like that. So the reason, remember how I told you I would tell you guys why we kept this as -500? Well, it's because when we press the Mario button, it also presses the star button. So if we have this as 0, then it's actually going to start us off with 500 steps, even if we haven't pressed the star yet. So that's why we kept it as -500, since we're adding 500 each time. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to display some winning messages once our game is over or once the user has met their goal. So over here we have 3 winning messages. So there's you win 1, 2, and 3. So over here now, we're going to actually pause the tutorial and we're going to watch this video. It's also in Google Classroom, but in case you can't find it, we have the link here. So just take a second to copy this link, put it in a new tab, and watch the video. Now that you guys are done watching the video, we basically talked about arrays, which is a concept we're going to use right now actually. Arrays are a variable, but they can actually store multiple variables. It's kind of like a grocery list. We can have bananas, bread, eggs, all of that in one list. We don't have to have separate lists for each item. So we're actually going to create an array to store all of our winning messages. So to create a variable array, we're going to type var and then call our array messages. And we're going to set this equal to, we're going to put some square brackets, and in case you can't find the square brackets, they're a line above the enter key. So that should help. And then we're going to type in our you win messages. So we want our first message, our second message, and our third message. And make sure when you type all these messages out that the W is capital. In coding, you have to be really careful about how you spell everything and how you capitalize it, because it can get picky sometimes. So now what we're going to do is we want to hide these messages. We don't want to display a winning message before the game's even started, right? So we're actually going to call the messages from our messages array. We're going to say messages 0.hide. And this is going to hide our first message. That seems kind of weird, right? How they have 0, but computers actually count starting from 0, like how we count from 1. So this is like the 0th position, this is our first one, and this is our second one. So now on the next 2 lines, we're just going to type in to hide the second one using messages 1, and then hide the third one. And to hide the messages, you also want to make sure you put these numbers in square brackets, because this is kind of like an index, like how we number our lists. Like first we need to do this, next we need to do this. This is basically kind of like numbering stuff. So this is our first or 0 index. This is our second index, this is our 0th index, this is our first index, this is our second index, even though that's technically like the third item. So it can get kind of confusing sometimes. Okay, so the last thing we want to do is we want to do this forever loop. And this basically is going to check if our steps walked so far is greater than our step goal, if we've met our step goal. So this is already filled in for you, but we still have to do some of the stuff. Like what's going to happen once our step goal is reached, right? Once we reach our goal. So first of all, we want to hide our star. So that's the add steps button, and we can just say .hide. We can also display a winning message. So right now, you guys don't know which messages are which, right? So this kind of makes the game a bit more fun. We're just going to type in messages and then pick a random number, 0, 1, 2. Pick any of those 3 numbers and say messages and then that number dot show. And it's going to show you a random message. So now let's try running our game. We can continue adding some steps, and then it shows a random message. If you don't like the message, you can always change it to another one. So say, whoops, that's a lot. Okay, I reached my goal, and it displayed this. So that's it for today's Coding for Good badge. So I hope you guys really enjoyed this. Make sure to show your friends and family this super awesome game because it can help them too, you know? So you guys should be really proud of yourself. We did almost 150 lines of code, and we used a bunch of really new concepts like arrays, for example. And yeah, so make sure if you guys haven't earned your first or second Coding for Good badges, you can always email us if you even have questions. And make sure to show us your projects on Google Classroom too.